David. Lieutenant Doyle and the chaplain have arranged for outings for the patients. On certain days, cars will come to the fort. In them will be one patient and one attendant. Then they will all drive in one long line to the country and make a tour for fresh air, coming back again in several hours. Lists are made out, so this can be done properly. I managed to arrange with the sergeant clerk who writes out these lists that Doris will drive my patient. His name is David. David is a young Negro. He sits quiet and content in a chair and looks down on the floor at all times, straight ahead of his chair. He has on his young face a constant smile. His face is of a distinguished and fine formation, and for his race, I think one of the best. Purist apologies from me, the reader, for some racism in the narration. He never says anything, but when he is given something, he looks at it intently, as if he has never seen it before. For a long, long time, he thanks you with a nod and with his eyes, and goes back to the quiet smile and the stare. He looks forever as if he were posing for a black statue of St. Anthony. Because a strong wind blows in from the lake, David gets a warm cover over his bathrobe, and over this a coat. Doris brings a two-seater. He sits between us, and we are checked out. All through the long drive, he looks at the spot where the clutch comes out of the floorboards, never at the country. On the third such round ride, Doris brought him some chocolate, for which he thanked her with a silent, great dignity. Also, there are a pair of big fur mittens to put on his hands because it is very cold in the open car. We have to stop to put them on, and in this time the train of cars with patients passes us and is far ahead. The regulations forbid this, but we drive our own way, out to the country. It is nicer, we can go faster, and it is more fun than continually watching the car ahead. We come to many nice places and stop at one and walk through the wood. David we leave in the car, and we make him comfortable with a blanket. It is a quiet, deserted road. We were not far at any time, or long gone, when we came back and looked into the car. David was gone. Doris ran to the right, I to the left. We shouted his name into the woods and fields. There was no sign of David. This will surely mean the guardhouse. It is a serious offense, even if David is not dangerous, or perhaps he is, very much so, and has only been waiting for this moment. We climbed into the car. There he was, the top of his head stuck up over the side. He was sitting out on the running board, where we had never looked, his hands folded in his lap with the saint's smile. After this, they did not let us take him out again. The committee crossed Doris and her car off the list. I was reprimanded, and David went out in another car with another attendant. I can visit him in his ward, bring him custard and chocolate, and feed it to him. His doctor says he is not getting any better, and in another week he is put to bed. David is very ill. He looks straight ahead of himself, somewhere about 12 feet in front of his face, and seems smaller. His hands rest silently and loose at the sides of his body. It is feared he will die. The young doctor whom I like, and who was very kind to David, has little hope for him. He seems not to want to live, and late one night he almost dies. The doctor took gloves of rubber, and with his forefinger reached up into the sick boy's backside. There must be a nerve center there, because he reacted and almost sat up straight. Then, 2 days later, his breathing changed, and in the middle of the night he died. It is not sad, though it is the first time. It is not sad, though it is the first time I have seen it happen. When I was very little, a stupid nurse took me on a Sunday afternoon to the cemetery. Behind great windows lay the dead, and among them one I will always see, a very little old countess. Her feet were in thin paper shoes. 2 candles burned at the sides of her plain black wooden coffin. Her little hands were folded over a black crucifix, and between their fingers were wound the beads of a rosary. I have never been able to forget this, because her eyes were wide open. A fly circled over her face and landed in the middle of the eye. The fly walked around over the staring pupils, and I waited for the face to move, but the little lady was so dead that the fly was undisturbed. It walked down the bridge of the nose, and then into one of the nostrils, came out again, and left the face. That seemed complete death to me, and made me angry. The cemetery was on a hill over the town. It was filled with broken columns, weeping stone angels, crosses big and small, white and black, and young trees. It was raining. The bells of the mortuary chapel had a high, homeless sound. In the hall, behind the large windows, where the dead lie in view, stood several people, curious and staring. Against the walls leaned flags, lanterns, and a crucifix on a long pole. All this was used for the funerals, and the most ugly of all things was the smell of cooking that drifted into the corridor from the end of the hall, where lived the caretaker. It was Sunday, and the smell was of goulash, coffee, and beer. The Countess was so very dead to me, because I had seen her alive. I lived at the time alone with a French nurse in a little walled garden in Gmudden, in the town of Tronsey, and the Salzkammergut. Although we were in Austria, and I was 5 years of age, I could hardly speak German. On the waters were swans, many white, a few black. In the garden were immense chestnut trees that formed a green roof over it, and the little old lady fitted so well into this. She wore a black velvet ribbon on her thin neck, stood and sat straight, and had the character of a turtle in her face. That, of course, was the wrinkly skin, a proud mouth without lips, and the nostrils that leaned back. Ugly as she was, I loved her. She spoke beautiful French, had in her appearance a commanding little general's military correctness and elegance. I remembered her in all her motions, but David's death was not like this. There was a man in the fort who apparently had no duty to perform. He is asked to drill or put on the guard. He is never asked to drill or put on the guard detail. He is a corporal, and now that we have a dead soldier, he appears to be the undertaker. David is in the room. He lies naked on a table, and the undertaker is draining the blood from his body and pumping some liquid into it. He sits at the head and feels David's ear to see if it is getting stiff. In the evening, David is most beautiful. He has the form of a statue, much finer than any white man I have ever seen. Blue lights play over his body. The part from the chest to his knees is the finest. Even his organs are well designed, small, compact, and part of his loins. His legs and arms look strong, as if polished steel were covered in a thin layer of cloudy wax, opaque yet transparent. It is a fine pleasure to look at him. He does not look at all dead. I have watched some operations in Oswego on colored men. When their abdomens are opened, there is snowy whiteness inside for several centimeters, and only when the surgeon cuts down deeper does the dark blood come up and fill the cut. The knowledge of anatomy explains David's body. I know little of it, but enough to respect its wonder. I know where heart, lungs, intestines are, where the bones lead to, and where they are joined. The forms of all this can be felt through his skin. I go to him as often as I can, just to stand and look at his death. He never ceases to be young and strong, and somehow there is consolidation in this room. It is like some of the music of the Bruch Concerto. The soldiers are decent. It is the first death in the hospital. They take it seriously and play taps for him, give him an escort, and drape his flag over the coffin. One man has to take him home. They all seem sad to me, their mothers, children, and very small. This is most evident in the way they dress and clean their shoes and are quiet for David. And that is the end of the story called David.